Good morning. I'm Father Tom Malionik. I'm the rector of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Canterbury, New York, and this is Tuesday, May 26th, and this is the 12th installment of the Morning Musings, which is a work in progress. It's an experiment to try to find kind of the right way to add some depth and to add some substance to our life together as a parish. It originated in the practice of doing live streamed morning and evening prayer online, and then some folks started to come up with some questions and asked for some additional content, some way to sort of address some of the readings that were coming up in the daily offices. And so I decided I would try to do this. And slowly but surely, I'm kind of finding my way into this. And thank you. That was the question that was burning on my mind, Joan. Welcome. And thank you. I have been playing with the microphones. I think if my voice gets too quiet, I think it still drops out altogether. So I may still have some adjusting to do, but I think it's okay for now. I want to emphasize that in these morning musings, our purpose here isn't just to satisfy intellectual curiosity. It's not just a chance for us to shoot the bull about opinions and personal experiences. There's room for that, certainly, in our life together as Christians. But we're not here to delve into theoretical questions or hypotheticals or what's going to happen to so-and-so out there. We're really here to talk about our own life, and specifically our own life together as Christians, our own life as the people of St. Paul's Church in Kinderhook, in the here and now. So whatever we discuss, I think, is something that's going to have some bearing on the reality of our existence as a church, our mission as a church, our vocation as Christians, and the way we live that out with one another. So what we're really after here is trying to find additional ways to tap into what God is saying to us through the words of the scriptures, through the words of the prayer book, through our praying together at the daily office, or for that matter, even in the liturgical calendar, or through some of the other things that surround our religious life together. So our purpose here really is to build up our faith. What we really are after here is to get to know God better, through his Son, Jesus Christ, to become more receptive and responsive to the Holy Spirit that has been poured out upon us, so that we can be better servants of God, so that we can be better disciples and better apostles and better evangelists and better teachers or healers or miracle workers or whatever you and I have been called to do in the moment. It's about becoming more proficient at being Christians, at being followers of Jesus Christ. And that does entail some perhaps breaking open of the scriptures, or some digging a little bit into the background of the scriptures, or into our traditions or into our doctrines. Again, I'm not here to provide all of the answers. There are many more knowledgeable people out there, people who have much more knowledge and experience at their fingertips, who can give better and more articulate explanations and answers. I'm here really, if nothing else, just to connect us to them. And if you can go directly to them and get something out of that, you should do that. That's where I go when I need input, when I need to fill in the blanks, when I'm wondering what this means for my life. I turn to some of those sources, to some of the people whose scholarship and whose Christian living I have come to respect and admire. So I'm not here to give all of the answers. And again, like I say, my job as the rector of this church really is to help the community grow together as a Christian community, to help us live out our vocation better. I'm not going to be great at everything. I'm probably not going to be great at anything, but I am here to sort of bring whatever I can bring by the grace of God to bear on our life as the Christian community of St. Paul's and Kinderhook in this day, in this place, in this age. So the two things today that I wanted to raise with you, one of them is the saint for the day, Augustine of Canterbury, because he's such an interesting figure, and because we are descended from the Church of England, which is descended from the Church in England, and from the Catholic Church of the very earliest centuries, that there's something there in our genealogy, and there's something about the things that Augustine did and set in motion that I think have some significance for us today as Christians, because that's our heritage, because that's the stream of Christian tradition that has come down to us. And it's the one which, for whatever reason, God has chosen to preserve, and that God wants us to be able to hand on effectively to future generations. Whatever treasures we have managed to hold on to in our tradition are things that are worth saving, the things that make us distinctive as Anglicans among other Christian churches. Those are things that are worth preserving, and they're things that are worth handing on. And we may wind up handing on a lot of not so valuable stuff as well, but nevertheless, our job is to preserve, and our job is to, again, to pass along. That's what the word tradition means. Tradition doesn't mean a custom or a practice or whatever, not traditions, but the word traditio means the act of handing on. That's what we are about. We're about the act of handing on. We're about how we hand on to future generations the power and the content and the saving graces that have come down to us through our faith and our following of Jesus Christ. Some in this particular tradition. That doesn't invalidate other traditions, but we have some distinctives, I think, that are worth preserving. And Augustine of Canterbury has something to do with that. So I want to talk a little bit about Augustine today, and if my voice doesn't give out entirely, then I also want to say a little bit about the first book of Samuel, because we're back in 1 Samuel today for our readings. Anyway, Augustine, and again, this is a not designed to be an exhaustive, or for that matter, even an entirely accurate history. It's just to give you some background. It's just to give you a flavor, a sense of what's going on. If you're more of a history buff than I am, you will probably find fault with what I say, and you will probably have many other details that are meaningful to you. But just to set the stage for what we are about in this, in the probably the first 3 or 4 centuries of the Christian era. And we thanked yesterday Saint Bede, the Venerable Bede, for giving us that distinction between BC and AD. But in the first 300 years or so of the Christian era, Britain, the islands of Britain, so the island of Albion, where England and Scotland are located, and the island that is Ireland, the Isle of Man, a few of the other outlying islands, the Shetlands, the Hebrides, and so on. That whole area was populated by a variety of Celtic peoples, the ancestors of today's Celts, the speakers of Cornish and Welsh and Scottish and Irish and Manx, and probably a few other dialects that have specific names. And among those people in those first 300 years or so, were Christians. The Romans had a presence there, and Christianity probably came to the British Isles through Roman settlements, through Roman settlers, through Roman garrisons. We know that by the year 325, when the Council of Nicaea was convened in what is now Turkey, that there were already bishops in the British Isles, because we know their names are listed among the bishops who attended the Council of Nicaea. Interesting, the Council of Nicaea, one of the things that the Council of Nicaea decided was that Christians would no longer follow, for the celebration of Easter, would no longer follow the date of Passover, but instead would always celebrate Easter on a Sunday. So there was that beginning of detachment from the Jewish calendar, and that date of Easter would become significant moving forward. The Christianity that existed in Britain, however, was not like the kind of Western Roman Christianity that has come down to us through our more recent version of the Anglican stream of tradition. There was a Celtic character to it. There was a kind of native character to it. When Christianity came, the Celts did not say, okay, let's all live like the Romans, because the Romans weren't in Rome. So they were doing like the Celts did. And the Celts picked up certainly the faith. They picked it up from people who were probably not from the western part of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was huge. It stretched all the way from what we now think of as Spain in the west, all the way to the reaches of Persia and India. So the Roman Empire was huge, and a large portion of that was actually areas that were historically Greek and under Greek influence, and that espoused Greek culture and had a kind of Greek take on things. So there was a Christianity that had that kind of Greek flavor to it, and a lot of the Roman legions were actually Greek-speaking rather than Latin-speaking. And so it was probably those Greeks, at least some of them, who came to England and were stationed there or who settled there, either as the troops or as support or whatever. And so those folks brought with them that Eastern version of Christianity. And one of the things about Eastern Christianity, as opposed to what later happened in Western Roman Catholicism, is that Eastern Christianity was a little bit more loose and open to local cultural variety, and was more willing to accommodate local customs, to baptize local practices, to take local ideas, local religion, local philosophy, local music and art and so on, and to Christianize that and to put a Christian content into that faith. Wherever the Greek-speaking Christians, the Orthodox Christians from the East went, they brought the scriptures with them, certainly in Greek, but the first thing they would do anywhere was sit down and translate them. We have Russian Orthodoxy as a prime example of that, right? Cyril and Methodius, the first thing they did as missionaries was to translate the gospel into the local tongue. We heard again yesterday about Bede, who was a translator. He was at work on translating the scriptures into Anglo-Saxon, into Old English. So the Christianity that existed in Britain had that more Celtic flavor. It was organized along the same lines as existing Celtic communities. It was built around monasteries. It was built around dedicated holy men, sometimes holy wild men, and real adventuresome types. Columba, Iona was kind of the center, sort of up in the north, off the coast of northwestern England, Scotland, and so Celtic Christianity really was strong there, and it had its own flavor to it. And then in around the 400s, Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and so on, they began overrunning and populating the southeastern corner of England, what we now think of as the areas of Kent, for example. And they didn't mix well with the Celts. The Celts wound up being concentrated to the north and west of there, in Wales and Cornwall, Scotland, and Ireland, and so on. So you had these pagan Germanic tribes in the southeast of England, the original speakers of Anglo-Saxon and then of Old English. And then you had these Celts, some of whom were Christians, not all, some of whom were Christians in the other reaches of the British Isles. Now, shift for a little bit. By the 6th century, Rome, after having fallen as a political entity, Rome was no longer the center of the Roman Empire. Byzantium, Constantinople, was the center of the Roman Empire. That was the headquarters. That was the seat. Rome, however, the church in Rome began to exercise a lot more influence. And the Bishop of Rome, thanks to a couple of strong bishops of Rome who managed to managed to make advantageous deals with the barbarians, the pagan invaders, the Goths, the Franks, and so on, and managed to work out a peaceful solution so that something people did well under the church in Rome. And so the Roman church began to grow in influence and began to expand, began to make its influence felt. The missionaries who went out again to the west and the north of Europe started out primarily from Rome, and they brought with them Roman ways and Roman customs. And those Roman ways and Roman customs were actually, in many cases, pretty effective and pretty good. And so they were much in demand. There was a separate kind of Gaulish church, which also had a sort of continental Celtic flavor to it. But by and large, over time, the Roman customs prevailed. We think of it as having been imposed, but in point of fact, it was just that they were good and they were productive and they had some good things to contribute. And so there was a lot of reason to adopt Roman ways. So in the late 500s, Pope Gregory VI of Rome, one of only two saints in the entire history of the church to be called the Great. The other is Basil the Great in the East. But Pope Gregory VI, Gregory the Great, decided to launch yet another mission to England. There had been previous missions, and they had not done well. They had failed. Oftentimes, the missionaries were killed. The Germanic Anglo-Saxon tribes in the southwest of England were not convinced. They were not impressed, and so the missions failed. So Gregory, however, decides to try again, and he commissions a monk named Augustine to take a bunch of other monks. This is not Augustine, the same Augustine of Hippo, who was the bishop in North Africa. This is Augustine who starts out in Rome as a monk and goes to England. So Gregory supplies Augustine he gives him the commission to go and take a mission again to the southwest of England. And Gregory also provides him with a lot of instructions and a lot of written materials, one of which has come down to us as the Book of Pastoral Rule. And it really is a wonderful handbook of evangelism of cross-cultural evangelism. And they carry on an extensive correspondence, Augustine and Gregory do. Gregory gives Augustine all kinds of good pointers about how to interact and how to present Christianity and how not to get yourself beheaded. So Augustine goes and he lands with his monks in Kent. And as it turns out, the wife of King Ethelbert was already a Christian. And so the king, because he loved his wife after all, allows Augustine to set up shop in Kent, in the southeast of England, and the mission turns out to be a huge success. Augustine sets up his headquarters at Canterbury, where the headquarters of English-speaking Christianity have remained pretty much ever since. Ethelbert himself, after only a few years, himself converts, and there's this explosion of Christianity in the southeast of England, which is a wonderful thing. But now you have two different kinds of Christianity, two different versions, two different flavors of Christianity. You have Augustine and his Roman ways in the southeast, and then you have the older native indigenous Celtic ways in the northwest. And part of Augustine's mission was to unify the church in England. Now, Gregory VI seemed to be okay with a lot of accommodation and a lot of cross-fertilization, so that customs and traditions and teaching and learning would be shared, and there would be a blending of the two. Augustine didn't quite see it that way. He was a little bit more intent that things should become westernized. Gregory did say, yeah, just don't let them adopt the Eastern dates for Easter. The date of Easter was still one of the profound sticking points. There was no consistent way of dating Easter throughout the Christian world at that time. And again, we talked about Bede yesterday. That was one of his great achievements, was working on the calendar to try to come up with a date for Easter. Anyway, Augustine tries to unify the church, and in that he fails. He does convert all of southeastern England, but he does fail to unify the church. The Celtic bishops, he manages to rub them the wrong way. He comes across as arrogant, and so it takes another 60 years, and it will be another 60 years and another era in history before the Celtic Church finally decides that for the sake of unity in the churches and for the sake of unity in among all of the Christian world, that it would be advantageous for some of those Celtic customs and traditions to be set aside and instead to adopt the Roman model. Some of the big sticking points are, of course, the date of Easter. The monastic tonsure is also a big deal. Tonsure being the haircut that monks wear. In the East, they take a snip from 4 corners of the head. And in the West, you have that circular thing that you see in pictures of Friar Tuck from the days of Robin Hood. And that, for some reason, turned out to be a really big deal. But they finally go along with it. And then in around 660 A.D. at the Synod of Whitby, the Celtic Church adopts sort of the authority of Rome for its affairs in terms of its organization, in terms of its practices, in terms of its liturgy and so on, its calendar and whatever. Those things, they decide that the world was changing enough so that as the world grew, as political fortunes changed, it would be best to have the church unified over that. So there's what that results in then is a church that grows throughout England. Eventually another province, another major division of the church in England comes about with the establishment in York in the north. Canterbury is in the south, closer to London. York is in the north, and the northern part of England was, it was harder to gain access. So the northern part of England became separated off. And so there are 2 major archbishops in England. There's the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York. But the church essentially becomes a unified church at that point. And that's what will eventually grow into medieval Catholicism in England. And then, of course, starting with the Reformation, starting with Henry VIII, we start to see a further development in the Church of England, and that will come down to us as a specific and very distinctive stream of Christianity. I've been talking for half an hour. I'm sorry. I've run off here. I do want to say just a little bit, if you would let me, about the first book of Samuel, since I think we've gone past Augustine now. The first book of Samuel also has maybe some parallels, even, actually, come to think of it. We heard a couple of days ago from the very first chapter of Samuel about the birth of Samuel, about how there was this childless woman named Hannah, and she really wanted a baby. And she promised that if God would just give her a baby, that she would give the baby back to God. And she does that. She gives birth to Samuel. She's happy. Her husband's happy. Everybody's happy. And Samuel goes to live with Eli at the temple. And Eli raises him up. And the boy learns how to serve in the temple. And we all know, I think, from Sunday school, if you don't, get a Bible and read it, the story of the call of Samuel, how Samuel is asleep, and his job is to sleep near the lamp, the presence lamp, and to make sure that it doesn't go out and to keep the lamp supplied with oil. So his job is to sleep there and to make sure the light doesn't go out. And he's awakened by a voice calling Samuel, Samuel, and he thinks that Eli is calling him, and he goes back to Eli, and Eli says, I'm asleep, don't wake me up. I didn't call you, go back to bed, you're dreaming. And then it happens 3 times. And then finally Eli realizes this is God talking to Samuel. And he advises Samuel to say, okay, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. And that starts the whole ball rolling. Samuel becomes a prophet. And he becomes a faithful prophet. We heard him mentioned even in the Psalm this morning, right, that Samuel listened to the Lord. One of the first things, however, that God tells Samuel to do as a prophet is to reprimand Eli and to tell Eli that his days as the high priest and his family's days as a high priestly family are over. Eli has a couple of badass sons, and he's not disciplining them, and so they're kind of running amok, and God says, can't have that. And so he instructs Samuel to deliver the bad news to Eli. This makes Samuel very sad, and it's a very difficult thing to do because, after all, this was Eli who had taken him in and raised him and taught him everything he knew. And now he has to go to this old man and tell him that instead of fading away into an honorable retirement, he's going to receive a dishonorable discharge. And Eli accepts it. He understands. He knows what's going on. He says, yeah, God's right. I disciplined my sons. So the line of Eli ends and Samuel takes over. Now, in the course of the history, the wider history, the bigger story that we're looking at, right? We looked for a long time in morning and evening, in morning prayer, certainly, at the books of the law, the Exodus, and so on. And the people in the book of Joshua enter the promised land. But the kingdom is far from established. There are still hostile nations surrounding the area where the chosen people have settled. There are still tribes residing in the area, and God has given that area to them. And so there's going to have to be a certain amount of readjustment, if you will. And that means a certain amount of conquest. So that's what happens. Now, the book of Judges, which we have not yet dipped into, the book of Judges is about the leaders that God raises up from the various different tribes of Israel on an ad hoc basis to become sort of de facto ad hoc leaders of the chosen people in their various different struggles. So the judges are not just, as we think of them, as like courtroom justices. They don't spend all of their time with the law and deciding cases. That's not what a judge is. They were much more comprehensive than that. They did do that, but they were leaders who rose up as military leaders or as political leaders, as people who made the crucial decisions that needed to be made, and who had, by virtue of their charisma, by virtue of their having been chosen and appointed by God, had a certain amount of respect and following, and so people followed them. But they came and went. And over the course of the book of Judges, we see that, excuse me, like all political ideologies, the idea starts out as a good one. It starts out with the right intentions. It has some considerable successes at first, but it is always the case, and this is true throughout the Bible. We see this over and over and over again, and it comes out in the book of Revelation as well. Ultimately, what happens is that secular political schemes, political ideologies, economic systems, all of these things come upon the scene as great and marvelous new things. They solve problems. They address things that haven't been addressed before. But ultimately, over time, they go bad. They age, they sour, they decay, and they become corrupt. And it's not just power that corrupts, it's the institutions themselves. It's however well you might design an institution to protect against the corruption of power, nevertheless, power is required in order to accomplish even that. And so it's built into our own human systems almost from the start. We contain within ourselves the seeds of the destruction of our own best ideas. So things go bad. They go bad for the judges over time. Just as, for example, in Egypt. Egypt was salvation for the people of Canaan, for Israel and his family. My God, they were starving And then all of a sudden there's Egypt, and Joseph is there, and he's providing for them. And it's this wonderful thing. 400 years later, they can't wait to leave. They have to get out because things have gone bad. That's what happens. So over time, over the course of the book of the Judges, as Israel becomes more consolidated and more comfortable and in less tension from enemies on the outside, the judges become increasingly concerned with internal affairs. They particularly become concerned with their own affairs until we get the last of them, Samson, right, who's really worried about his hair, and he becomes more and more selfish and becomes less and less effective. And in the end, it turns out that the best thing he can do for the nation is to commit suicide and take a few Philistines with him. So that's how bad things get by the end of the Judges. And then we move on into the first book of Samuel, where the struggle with the Philistines is still going on. The war with the Philistines is still happening. In fact, the Philistines in the early chapters of Samuel, they've got the Ark of the Covenant. They've got basically the key symbol of the chosen people's identity. Now, Israel eventually gets it back, but the war is going on, and people are getting tired of it. And it's not the shalom they had in mind when God promised it to them. So Samuel grows up. He eventually becomes a judge in his own right. He becomes not only the religious leader, not only the religious leader of the chosen people, but he also becomes a strategist, and he becomes a military leader and a political leader, and does all of the things that the judges do. But this isn't good enough for the people. They decide that, hey, the other nations around us, the reason why they're winning is because they have kings. So we want a king too. We want to be like the big kids. We want to be like the other kids on the block. We want to have a king too. And Samuel resists the idea. And God says, Samuel, it's not you they're complaining about. It's me. It's really that it's not that they don't want to accept you. It's they don't want to accept me. And that's why they're rejecting you. But, if they want a king so badly, go ahead, give it to them, but warn them what will happen when they have a king. And there's that long passage that says that a king will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots. There will be military drafts. He will appoint commanders, and some of them he will make them plow his ground and reap his harvest. And they will have some of them make his implements of war and the equipment for his chariots. He'll take your daughters to be his perfumers and his cooks and his bakers, and he'll take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive orchards. He'll give them to his servants, and he'll take your tithes, right, the 10th shares. In other words, he will take God's portion of your grain and your vineyards and your flocks, and he will give them away to his servants. And he'll take your male servants and female servants and put them to work. And then you're going to cry out to me, and then you're going to complain about your king. But you chose this king for yourselves. And so when you cry out to me, hey, you made your bed, kind of. So the people refuse to listen to Samuel, and they say, no, we want a king over us so that we can be like all the other nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. So Samuel goes and he anoints Saul. And Saul, again, like the others, Saul goes out and anoints Samuel, and he does a pretty good job for a while, just like the other judges. But then the battle doesn't go well. The war with the Philistines is not progressing. What people wanted from Saul, he's not delivering. And so Saul decides at this point that the way he's going to make this situation better is, Samuel had anointed Saul to be judge. He had anointed him to be the leader of the nation. He had anointed him to be the chief military commander, to be the warrior. But he did not anoint Saul to be a priest. And Saul decides that that's what's missing, is that he also needs to be the chief religious leader, that he also needs to tell the nation, here, follow me, I'm going to be your high priest. And so he arrogates to himself the role of priest. And he decides that what's going to turn the tide of this war and unite the nation is for him to offer sacrifice, for him to set himself up as the religious leader as well. And it, like all sin, it seemed like a good idea at the time. It seemed like a good way to move things along. It seemed to Saul like a good way not to have to wait for God to act. And this is really the root of all sin for us, right? We get tired of waiting for God to act. We get tired that God doesn't seem to be acting the way we want God to act. We get tired of things not going our way. And so we decide that we're going to take matters into our own hands. Now, to a certain extent, we have been given a certain amount of authority, and the limits of that authority, and the quality of that authority, and the extent of that authority. We have guidance for that in what God has revealed to us. We have guidance for that in what is in the scriptures. But so often we are so eager and anxious and impatient for a solution that we bypass that. We bypass the stage of praying. We bypass the stage of the counsel of patience. We bypass that and we go straight for whatever quick fix we can glom onto. Go forward and discover, yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it may even have worked. It may even work. But then, of course, like with all of that, it contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction, because it's not the way God would have it play out. So anyway, when Saul decides that he's going to make himself priest and he's going to offer sacrifice, that's the last straw. God's done with Saul. He's overstepped his authority. And although God may forgive him personally, and there's a whole thing about Saul's repentance and gets afflicted and so on, and we'll hear maybe more about that in a little bit, but God has his own plans to move this along. So then he sends Samuel to do yet another hard thing. I mean, it's hard enough for Samuel. Samuel has become good friends with Saul. Samuel has benefited from Saul's patronage as the political leader. But now Samuel has to do something that really cuts across the grain of everything that he naturally would like to do. God has commissioned Saul essentially to commit high treason. He has sent Samuel to go out and anoint a replacement king. Now, nobody knows about this. In the passage we heard today, this morning, nobody knows about this except God and Samuel. So David doesn't know when he's being anointed that he's being anointed king. Jesse and his sons and everybody else, all the onlookers, they do not know that Samuel is anointing David to be king. They just know he's being singled out, that he's special in some way. And so part of what happens really hinges on that. The rest of the story as it develops with David and Saul together in the next few chapters of 1 Samuel, that all of that hinges on this not entirely known fact. So the Lord sends Samuel and says, okay, I want you to go anoint one of the sons of Jesse. And Samuel says, how can I go? I mean, if Saul hears about it, he's going to kill me. And the Lord says, well, listen, just go say you're going to go offer a sacrifice and then anoint one of Jesse's sons, as I will tell you. That. So Samuel goes to Bethlehem, where Jesse lives. Because out of the city of bread, out of Bethlehem, comes the promised ruler, the promised savior of the nation. So Samuel goes to Bethlehem and gets Jesse to bring his sons to the sacrifice. The leaders see Samuel coming and they're like, oh, this is something can't be right, because they know that Samuel is tight. Samuel is tight with Saul. And usually if Saul's officials or his agents show up, it's usually because they've come to commandeer something So the elders of the city come and they're worried about what Samuel is about. And Samuel assures them, I'm just here to offer a sacrifice. And so you have that whole story about how Jesse parades each of his oldest 7 sons before Samuel, and God tells from the very beginning, says to Samuel, don't look on appearances, because the Lord doesn't see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. And so the Lord looks at the heart of each of Jesse's sons, and Samuel says, no, none of these. And they find out now, oh, there's David. And David is the baby. He's the child of the family. He's still out tending sheep. He's that young. That's what children were sent to do. He's out tending sheep. He has nothing better to do all day than to become a really good shot with a slingshot. Shooting cans off of rocks or something like that with his slingshot. And learning how to become a really good musician. Because what else is there to do when you're hanging out with the sheep all day? So David goes out, and then David comes in, and after God having told Samuel, don't judge by appearances, the description of David, he was ruddy, and he had beautiful eyes, and he was handsome. All the appearances were there, but that's not why Samuel anoints him. It's not because of the outward appearance. It is precisely because of what's inside. And this is not an account of David rising to power naturally by virtue of his own accomplishments or his own knowledge or his own skill. He's a kid. He's at best a teenager, probably a preteen at this point. Right? He's just now starting to grow into anything resembling adulthood. But Samuel anoints him. So it is by the choice of God that David is chosen before he has demonstrated any prowess of any kind, before he has demonstrated any qualifications. God chooses him, and it is precisely because of that choosing that God blesses him with success over and over again, that he discovers time and time again that he has had these skills, music, which is going to play a big role in his relationship with Saul, or his ability to fire, his ability as a marksman, which is going to help him be the one who defeats the Philistines. So all of those things are going to be recognized after the fact. But he's chosen as king before those things become evident. And that's where we leave. The first book of Samuel today. We're not going to read consistently from 1 Samuel, but we will occasionally get passages from it. I have now been talking for 45 minutes and my voice is pretty shot. So I'm going to just check on the comments section and see if there's anybody who is, if there are questions or anything, or comments or other topics. If you have topics that you'd like me to address that are, again, the condition is that they not be just simply speculative and that they not be about somebody else who's not here, but they be something about your own or our own following of Jesus for ourselves in the reality of our lives, whether it's St. Paul's or in the Diocese of Albany or if you're coming from somewhere else. But I want these sessions to be something about real growth in faith for us, not about simply improving intellectual or conceptual knowledge or accumulating facts or that kind of thing. We're here to grow in faith. So if you have something, though, that's a burning topic for you, that's something that really affects you in your life, then by all means share that, and we can maybe try to address that, and I'll try to say something about it if I can, or maybe point you in the right direction to some resources that will be helpful to you. So I'm going to just look over on the side here, if you don't mind. Let's see. Let's see. Hi, Penny. I don't have timestamps on these, so I'm not sure when people have joined. Stephen, I'm not sure whether you are telling me things that I should be saying and then I've already said them, or whether you are just echoing what I have said. I don't know about the sound quality part of it is my voice. I think I still need to fess with the microphone so that I have it adjusted so it picks up my voice even when I'm quieter. I think the real solution to this is going to be I'm going to need to get a microphone boom so that I can have the microphone closer to my mouth, and it won't be in the way of the visual. So anyway, I'm sorry for the ongoing struggles with the sound. And what can I say, Joan? Thank you for your encouragement and your comment. This is what we're really trying to do here. I'm really hoping to offer something that is needed, something that will feed you in your life with Christ, something that will feed you as a disciple and help you to be a better servant of God, and that will help us to be better servants of God together. That's really what I'm hoping. That's what I pray for. So continue, please, to pray for me and to pray for St. Paul's Church. Pray for each other. Pray for one another. Be kind to one another, especially, and gentle with one another. And I will hopefully, God willing, see you again at 5 o'clock today for evening prayer. And then by then, hopefully, my voice will be better, and maybe I'll have the microphone set a little bit better as well. God bless you all, and I will see you later.